I was the one whose CEO wife cheated on him, the one the court just branded a defamer, yet the internet dogpiled on me, calling me a sensitive loser and a clout-chasing husband. Meanwhile, she and her friends were lounging in her mansion, sipping expensive wine and laughing about their husband-taming tactics. They brainstormed ways to use her wealth and status to keep me pinned under her thumb, treating me like I was nothing. They had no idea that while I endured the humiliation of that court-ordered apology, I was documenting everything. I saved every hotel receipt, every recording of her arrogant threats, and every time she sneered that her affair was just a minor fling. I even signed 2 high-stakes contracts with an international extreme sports organization and the National Association to ensure my protection, planning to drag them into a real abyss while the whole world watched me climb the 979-meter Angel Falls. My CEO wife had the nerve to carry on an affair with her male assistant right under my nose. In a fit of rage, I leaked her dirty secrets all over the internet. She didn't hesitate to strike back, suing me for defamation to shut me up. The judge ruled against me immediately, ordering a public online apology every day for 10 days. After the hearing, Miriam walked up and smugly patted my cheek. I told you, Edward, that finding a younger man was just a way to spice up our dull marriage. Once I've had my fun, I will come back home, so I do not understand why you are being so difficult. Besides, I have no intention of granting you a divorce. You're just a minor influencer, so what do you really think you can do to stop me? She assumed her wealth and status would force me into submission. She had no clue that I was already steps ahead with my counterattack. That night, I posted a video titled First Day of Apologizing to My Virtuous Wife, and it went viral instantly, hitting the top 3 on Twitter. At that moment, Miriam was out on a date with her assistant, Joey. She froze when she saw the flood of notifications tagging her on social media. The court order was clear. Edward Miller was required to post a public apology to Miriam Sutherland every day for the next 10 days. I was also ordered to pay her $15,000 in damages. The sound of the gavel felt like a physical blow to my spine. It was so ironic. I watched the sunlight stream through the courthouse windows, yet I felt a deathly chill in my bones. My lawyer gave my shoulder a supportive pat. He told me not to let the defamation ruling get to me because the real battle was the upcoming divorce. I stopped listening after that. My head felt like it was filled with static and my thoughts were a total blur. I was the one who had been betrayed, so I could not understand why I was the one forced to apologize. Even if I had been impulsive and used my platform to stir up a storm, crossing some legal boundaries in the process, she was the one who had pushed me to the edge. When I first caught Miriam cheating, I told her I wanted a divorce immediately. The marriage was dead and I wanted a clean break. She just ripped the papers in half and told me I was being overly sensitive over a simple kiss. I had no choice but to keep gathering evidence of her illicit affair with Joey so my lawyer could file the papers. She used her business as an excuse to flee the country and delay the court proceedings. In reality, she was in Europe living it up with Joey while I was stuck dealing with the fallout. During those weeks, she completely destroyed any remaining respect I had for her. She even let Joey send me photos of them together in bed along with taunting texts. He told me he never expected a woman nearing 30 to be so wild and that he was having the time of his life. I lost my mind and trashed the house, but the rage still would not go away. I logged into my accounts and leaked every bit of evidence I had, which set social media on fire. Since she had pushed me into a corner, I decided that no one was going to come out of this unscathed. I didn't realize Miriam had a team ready to kill the story, and the buzz died down almost instantly. Then she hit me with the defamation suit. I heard my name and looked up to see her strutting toward me in her designer heels, looking every bit the powerful, arrogant CEO. The clicking of her heels on the marble floor echoed in my head. I scowled and stood up to leave, but she rushed over and grabbed my arm. She told me to stay put and stop making a scene. She asked if I was done acting out and complained about how much of her precious time I was wasting on such trivial matters. I asked if she was too busy sleeping with Joey to handle her own divorce. I looked at her and realized there was nothing left but pure disgust. Miriam's expression turned cold instantly. She told me I should be more like her friends' husbands and just look the other way. She made it clear she would not agree to a divorce. Then she reached out and patronizingly patted my cheek. She asked what a pathetic influencer like me could actually do to her. She told me for the 1,000th time that she was just bored with our 5-year marriage and needed a little excitement. She could not understand why I was so obsessed with getting a divorce over something she considered minor. I shoved her hand away and told her to stop bringing up her brainless friends. I asked if I was supposed to be grateful that she at least chose a man to cheat on me with. Her excuses were as pathetic as her circle of friends. She told me to stop being so cynical, but I cut her off immediately. I knew she was only staying married to protect protect her public image so she could win that National Outstanding Young Woman Award. She wanted the stability of a husband at home while she played around with her assistant on the side. I told her it was never going to happen because I was going to get that divorce no matter what. Her face turned from pale to a deep red as I threw her own words back at her. She stared at me for a long time before she forced a smirk, trying to look like she did not care. She laughed and told me this was getting more interesting than her little fling with Joey. She challenged me to try and force her into a divorce. As she brushed past me, she whispered for me not to forget to fulfill the court order. I watched her walk away and pulled out my phone to make sure the recording had saved properly. It was perfect. I had another piece of evidence to use against her. Combined with everything else I had documented, I finally had enough to blow her world apart. Since she loved control and apologies so much, I decided to give her exactly what she wanted in the most public way possible. I told myself to be ready because this was going to be a performance she would never forget. An hour later, I was back in my office in Los Angeles, ready to get to work. As an outdoor influencer with over 10 million followers, I had a full production team behind me. They all looked at me with deep concern the moment I walked in. Even though Miriam had managed to get my previous video taken down, the damage to my reputation was already done. People usually side with the woman in these situations, even if that woman is a powerful CEO like Miriam Sutherland. I waved off my team's concerns and locked myself in my office. I opened a new document and started typing, finishing all 10 apology scripts in a single sitting. I titled the series First Day of Apologizing to My Virtuous Wife and planned to just update the count for each subsequent post. The script started with a very formal greeting to Ms. Miriam Sutherland from her husband, Edward Miller. I began by offering a formal apology for my previous inappropriate comments about her on social media. I sarcastically stated that she and Joey Vance were clearly in love and that I had no right to share her private affairs with the world. I noted that even if her actions were morally questionable, I should not have posted anything that might damage her perfect reputation. I told the camera that I had reflected on my narrow-mindedness and realized she was not cheating. She was just capable of loving many people at once. I mentioned how she had told me after the trial that her young lover was just a way to spice up our boring 5-year marriage. I told my followers that as a powerful CEO, she shouldn't be expected to give her love to just one man. I said her love was so great it deserved to be shared with the whole country, if not the entire world. I ended the video with a very sincere apology, followed by a bonus clip of the recording I took of her mocking me after court. Since the court had not specified the exact wording of the apology, I felt perfectly justified in being as honest as possible. I did not post it yet, instead spending the afternoon filming the remaining 9 videos in various locations around the studio. I kept the same format for all of them, but I changed the bonus footage at the end of each one to reveal a new secret. In the second video, I talked about how Miriam would occasionally surprise me with thoughtful gifts. Then the bonus clip showed receipts for thousands of dollars in luxury goods she had bought for Joey Vance. It turned out she only gave me the free samples and promotional items that came with his expensive gifts. I even included screenshots of Joey bragging about his new gear on Instagram. For the third video, I thanked her for bringing home a gourmet dinner to celebrate my birthday despite her busy schedule. The evidence at the end showed that the food was actually leftovers from a romantic dinner she had with Joey earlier that night. The rest of the series followed that pattern where I acted humble while the clips at the end exposed her cruelty. I shared hotel check-in records and proof that she encouraged Joey to send me those graphic photos and insulting messages. It was evening by the time I finished editing all 10 videos. I called my assistant, Chloe Bennett, and told her to start the rollout immediately. I instructed her to put a significant ad budget behind the posts and to ensure they went live every morning like clockwork. Chloe looked at me with wide eyes and asked if I was worried about the videos being taken down or getting sued for a second time. I told her I had everything under control. I took a deep breath and gave her one more instruction. I told her to mirror the posts on my international TikTok account to make sure the story went global. Chloe looked at me with sheer terror, asking if I was about to do something dangerous. I just dismissed her concerns and kept my plans to myself. Posting the content was easy, but keeping it online was the real challenge since I did not want a repeat of last time. I sat there tapping my desk and realized I had to make a deal with the devil to get some real protection. I needed to bring in some heavy hitters who could stand up to Miriam's legal team. I knew I could not win a war against her wealth alone. Meanwhile, Miriam was at her private estate, surrounded by her inner circle of friends who spent their time flattering her. She looked perfectly relaxed as she enjoyed the life of luxury she thought was permanent. She was busy playing with Joey, who was practically acting like her servant. Miriam's friends are laughing about how the lawsuit was just the beginning of her revenge against me. They joked about how a nobody like me actually thought he had the right to ask a powerful woman for a divorce. They mocked me for thinking I was someone special. However, the mention of divorce made Miriam's face cloud over instantly. Her frenemy Rita Higgins noticed the shift in mood and signaled the others to change the subject. Rita was observant and could tell Miriam was on edge. Usually, Miriam would head straight for the bedroom with Joey the second they arrived at the estate. Today, she just sat there, which was a clear sign that something was bothering her. Her lack of interest in Joey told the whole story. The other women picked up on the tension and started acting like they were deeply concerned for her well-being. Miriam took a long sip of her wine and finally spoke up in a low voice. She told them I was dead set on the divorce and asked if they had any ideas on how to shut me up. Rita asked if she was worried about the scandal ruining her chances for that prestigious award. Miriam nodded, confirming that was exactly what was on her mind. She explained that winning the award would skyrocket the company's valuation and force her mother to finally retire. The room went silent as the four of them tried to think of a way to stop me. They needed a plan that would protect Miriam's reputation at all costs. After a while, Rita suggested that they go after my family to gain some leverage. Miriam dismissed the idea, saying my family situation was complicated and that I wasn't close enough to them for it to work. She needed something that would hit me harder than that. Rita leaned in and asked if I would stay so calm if something happened to my biological mother. Miriam stopped what she was doing and looked at Rita, interested in hearing the rest of the plan. She gestured for a frenemy to keep talking. Rita suggested they frame my mother, who worked a government job, to destroy her reputation and career. She said if I was smart, I would back down to save her, but if I refused, they could just ruin my entire family. It was a cold and calculated move that Miriam seemed to consider. Rita watched Miriam closely as she processed the idea of destroying my mother. Finally, Miriam nodded, showing she was willing to go that far to get what she wanted. She reached for her phone to make the call, but a sudden scream from Joey interrupted her. Everyone turned to look at Joey, who was staring at his phone with trembling hands. He stammered that something terrible had happened and that it was a total disaster. Miriam told him to calm down, saying that nothing could be that bad. Despite her annoyance, she snatched the phone out of his hand to see what he was looking at. The screen showed my video titled First Day of apologizing to my virtuous wife at the number 3 spot on the trending list. It was gaining views at an incredible rate. She hated the title, but she started to smirk when she saw me giving a formal apology at the start of the clip. However, as the video played on, her smug expression began to fade as the tone shifted. She realized I wasn't actually apologizing in the way she had expected. When a recording of her mocking me after the trial started playing, the room went dead silent. Everyone heard her voice clear as day, and their jaws dropped in shock. They couldn't believe I had the guts to actually post that for the world to hear. Miriam gripped the phone so hard her knuckles turned white as she read the comments. The internet was tearing her apart, saying someone like her didn't deserve any awards. People were telling her to just disappear and stop pretending to be a role model. Commenters called her a toxic woman and praised my achievements in the extreme sports world. They were disgusted by her arrogance and her belief that her money made her untouchable. People were already calling for her to be held accountable for her actions. Some of the comments were incredibly harsh, and as she scrolled through them, Miriam's face turned a terrifying shade of red. She was shaking with pure rage and grinding her teeth together. A second later, she let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the mansion. She smashed the phone onto the floor, and the screen shattered into a million pieces. Joey looked terrified, but Miriam ignored him and immediately grabbed another phone to start calling her PR people. She was desperate to kill the story before it could do any more damage to her reputation. Every call she made only added to her growing sense of panic. The media executives who used to do whatever she asked were suddenly refusing to help her silence me. She was losing her grip on the narrative, and she did not know why. They even told her to just settle with me peacefully and stop making things worse. The reason for their sudden change of heart was simple. I had signed contracts with 2 powerful entities that made me untouchable. I was no longer just a lone influencer she could bully. I had renewed my partnership with the global extreme sports giant Black Bull, promising to complete one of the legendary Ozaki 8 trials within the year. 6 years ago, I had already completed 2 of those trials with their backing and became a household name overnight. I was returning to the world that made me famous. Black Bull had already posted a statement on their website declaring their full support for me during my training. Even though they were an international corporation, their global influence made Sutherland Group look like a local startup. They had the power to protect me from any legal or PR games Miriam tried to play. Miriam was just the CEO, and she did not have the final say over the entire company. If her personal scandals started affecting the stock price, the board of directors would not hesitate to fire her. She was walking on very thin ice with her her own shareholders. To make matters worse for her, I had recently been appointed as the vice president of the National Extreme Sports Association. The president, Marcus Thompson, made a public statement supporting me and called for people to focus on the facts of the case. He even tagged the federal regulatory agencies to make sure everyone was watching. Miriam didn't think much of the statement at first, but that changed once she learned about Marcus Thompson's background. People were terrified of him, and the consensus was that crossing him would result in a swift and brutal downfall. He was not the kind of man you wanted as an enemy. For the first time, Miriam was truly scared. Meanwhile, I was back in my old apartment in Los Angeles, trying to mentally prepare for what was coming. I couldn't stop thinking about the challenge ahead, a free solo climb of the 980-meter High Angel Falls. That was the deal I made with Black Bull to get their protection. Looking back at my wilder years, I realized that I now had a much deeper respect and fear for the power of nature. This was going to be the most dangerous thing I had ever done. I had done insane things before, like skiing down Mont Blanc in the Alps while dodging triggered avalanches. I still remembered the feeling of flying down the mountain with a wall of snow trying to swallow me whole. It was a rush that most people could never understand. That same year, I surfed giant waves in Hawaii while great white sharks circled below me. A 70-foot wave nearly crushed me into the ocean floor, but I somehow survived and became a star. Everyone in the sport knew I was lucky to be alive after that day. Now that I was nearly 30, Miriam's refusal to grant me a divorce had pushed me back to the edge. It was incredibly ironic that a failing marriage was the reason I was risking my life once again. I had to face death just to get my freedom back. I sat up and tried to clear my head with some meditation, but my phone started buzzing on the table. I looked down and saw Miriam's name flashing on the screen. I knew this was not going to be a pleasant conversation. I hesitated for a second before finally picking up. Miriam immediately started screaming at me, her voice shrill and full of fury. She accused me of going too far and ruining her life. She demanded that I delete the videos immediately because everyone was laughing at her. I waited for her to finish her rant before calmly asking if she was done. I wasn't intimidated by her threats anymore. She told me to stop being so smug, but I told her to meet me at the courthouse the next morning. I instructed her to bring her ID and all the necessary paperwork. I had the settlement ready and told her all she had to do was sign. I told her I wanted a $30 million settlement. She laughed and asked if I was planning to rob a bank next. I reminded her that she was the one who cheated and destroyed our life together, so she owed me. I reminded her that I saved her outdoor brand by giving them my endorsement for practically nothing when they were failing. I had basically given them my image rights for free to keep her company afloat. That $30 million was money she legitimately owed me for all those years of work. I knew that once her real estate was taken out of the equation, she only had about $40 million in liquid cash. My priority was getting that money and finalizing the divorce so I could move on with my life. I was done being the laughingstock of the internet. There was a long silence before she spoke again, and this time her voice was much softer. She asked if we really had to end things like this after 5 years together. She claimed that she still cared about me, which was a blatant lie. I told her to stop talking because I wasn't in the mood for her games. She couldn't say she loved me while she was literally in bed with Joey. She had even let him send me those photos just to torment me. I told her that a CEO should be smarter than to use such a pathetic excuse. She claimed she was just drunk and going through a hard time, calling the whole affair a mistake. She said it was all just a big accident that meant nothing. She kept making excuses, but they all sounded completely hollow to me. I rubbed my temples and told her I was done listening to her lies. I warned her that if she wasn't at the courthouse tomorrow, things were going to get a lot worse for her. I told her I was curious to see what would crash first, her company's stock or her career. I hung up before she could respond, knowing I had the upper hand now. With Marcus Thompson on my side, she didn't have the power to bury me anymore. It took a long time for my heart rate to return to normal after I hung up. I kept seeing flashes of the girl I first met, the one who wore jeans and kept her hair in a ponytail. That version of Miriam seemed so far away from the cold, power-hungry woman she had become. The two versions of her kept merging and splitting in my mind until they both vanished. 6 years ago, Miriam Sutherland was a different person. She was brilliant, driven, and seemed genuinely kind. She was someone I truly believed I could build a life with. She had tracked me down after seeing my sports clips online, hoping I could help save her family's company. When I looked in her eyes for the first time, I felt like I was seeing something special. I knew right then that I was in deep trouble. I was attracted to her, but I also genuinely wanted to help an American brand reach a global audience. When she told me the company was on the verge of bankruptcy, I didn't push for a huge payday. I only asked for a token payment of $150,000 to get started. I even gave her my image rights for free to help her save on costs. We spent months traveling and researching, working together together to create a high-performance clothing line that was also stylish. We were a great team back then, and we built something special together. I was the one who wrote the brand's origin story, focusing on the idea of an underdog rising to the top. After working together so closely for 3 months, it felt natural for us to start dating. The brand exploded in popularity the following year, and we decided to get married. Since both of our fathers had passed away years ago, her mother suggested we have a very small, quiet wedding. We both agreed at the time, thinking that a simple ceremony was more our style anyway. We didn't realize it was the first sign of her mother's controlling nature. Once the company was profitable and the financial crisis was over, Miriam's mother, Eleanor, showed her true colors. She started treating me like an unwanted house guest and made no effort to hide her contempt for me. She spoke to me as if I was something she had picked up at a clearance sale. The moment my contract was up, Eleanor forced me out of the company and hired a big-name celebrity to replace me. Miriam fought with her mother constantly back then, defending me and our work together. They were always at each other's throats over how I was being treated. Everything changed when Miriam's friends from college started hanging around the house. They were always whispering in her ear about how she needed to control her husband and maintain her power. Slowly but surely, Miriam started to listen to them and began to change. By our 3rd year of marriage, I realized I needed to focus on my own career again. I expanded my production studio and hired a team, using my reputation to transition into a full-time outdoor influencer. I needed something of my own that they couldn't take away from me. That was when I hired Chloe Bennett and the rest of the crew. I'm just glad I woke up and realized what was happening before it was too late to save myself. That same year, Miriam became the CEO, and she basically stopped coming home. Our marriage turned into a business arrangement where we barely even spoke to each other. The foundation of our relationship had been crumbling for a long time. Joey Vance was just the final spark that set the whole thing on fire. I went over to the bar and poured myself a glass of bourbon, watching the amber liquid swirl in the glass. I didn't drink it. I just let the sharp scent clear my head for a moment. It was the only thing that felt real in the middle of all this madness. When I first confronted her about Joey, I told her the marriage was over and we should just end it quietly. She just brushed me off and told me I was being dramatic about a simple kiss. She refused to even consider a divorce at the time. She started avoiding me after that, so I went to see Eleanor Sutherland. I thought she would be happy to see me go, but she wouldn't even let me in the house. Her butler met me at the gate to deliver her message. He told me that his mistress said an athlete like me should be grateful she hadn't dumped me yet. She told him to tell me I had no right to ask for a divorce. That was the moment I decided to start documenting every single one of Miriam's lies. It was crazy how everything had turned around, and I was the one who ended up in court. I picked up my phone and called my old friend Atlas Sterling. I told him I needed his help with a situation that was about to get very ugly. He told me to just say the word and he would be there. I looked at an old photo of the two of us from our younger days. Atlas was always the wild one, and he was exactly the kind of person I needed in my corner right now. We have been like brothers since our days on the ski team together. He owned a string of bars and clubs now and knew how to handle people from all walks of life. He was the perfect person to help me deal with the mess Miriam had created. I was done being nice to Miriam Sutherland. I wanted to make sure her friends and Joey Vance paid for what they had done as well. Joey knew exactly what he was doing when he got between us, so I had no sympathy for him. Her friends were the ones who really disgusted me. They were the ones who encouraged her to treat me like a subordinate and taught her how to manipulate me. They had been poison in her ear for years, and it was time for them to see the consequences. I knew the lawsuit was their idea as well. They thought they could use Miriam's money to break me and turn me into a loyal pet. I was not going to stop until every single one of them regretted ever crossing me. Atlas agreed to help the second I finished explaining the plan. I told him I appreciated it, but warned him to be careful and not leave any loose ends. He told me not to worry and that he would handle everything perfectly. He told me to relax and that he had it covered. The next morning, I stood outside the courthouse and reviewed the data for the Angel Falls climb. I knew that I would need more than just courage to survive that mountain. I needed to know every single inch of it. My life depended on me being prepared for every possible scenario. I heard a car approaching and looked up to see a black Maybach pulling into the lot. I recognized the plates immediately. It was Eleanor Sutherland's car. I felt a wave of irritation as the car door opened. Eleanor Sutherland stepped out first, followed by Miriam, who looked exhausted despite her perfect makeup. It was clear that her mother had been giving her a hard time since the video went viral. It looked like she had just finished a long lecture from her mother. Eleanor was the first to speak, her voice dripping with venom. She asked me how I had the nerve to try and blackmail her daughter for $30 million. I told her that money was exactly what I was owed, and I refused to back down. She laughed and asked if I really thought I was worth that much money. Her voice was full of the typical arrogance that came with her wealth. She accused me of of trying to destroy her daughter's reputation and hurting the company's stock price. She pulled a set of divorce papers from her bag and thrust them toward me. She looked like she wanted to kill me right then and there. She told me to sign the papers and then post a public retraction saying everything I had said was a lie. She even wanted me to claim that I was mentally unstable. She threatened me, but I just calmly asked her what she was going to do about it. I asked her if she was going to use me up and throw me away like she did before. I reminded her of the time she had her butler tell me I was nothing but a useless athlete when I tried to talk to her. I wasn't that person anymore, and she needed to realize that. Eleanor's face darkened as I stood my ground. She told me I had a smart mouth, but that I was being foolish. She asked if I really thought a few videos and some minor supporters could help me win against her. She told me that I had no idea what kind of power Sutherland Group actually wielded. I told her that if her connections were as powerful as she claimed, she wouldn't be standing here talking to me. Real power doesn't need to make threats like that. She threatened to have my videos removed from the internet and to make sure I never worked again. I just smiled and pulled out my phone, showing her the screen. I wanted to see how she would react to the latest update. I told her that it looked like her connections weren't as strong as she thought they were. The screen showed that my latest video was currently #1 on the trending list. Yesterday's post was right behind it at #2, and the numbers were still climbing. Eleanor looked like she had seen a ghost as she realized her influence was gone. Not even her paid trolls were able to change the conversation online. She tried to maintain her composure, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She tried to act like she was still in control, telling me I should not get ahead of myself. I told her that her friends at the regulatory agencies were not going to be able to help her this time. I put my phone away and looked her dead in the eye. I reminded her that Marcus Thompson's family had been powerful in this country for generations. His family's influence went far beyond anything her corporate friends could manage. I suggested that her backers were probably already planning how to distance themselves from her. Eleanor's composure finally broke, and I could see her lips started to tremble. Miriam looked like she was about to have a panic attack as the reality of the situation set in. She whispered that this couldn't be happening, but we both knew it was. I told her that since I had risked my life for Marcus Thompson in the past, it was only natural that he would return the favor now. For a man like him, running the association was just a stepping stone to even greater power. He had resources she couldn't even dream of. He had reached out to me 2 years ago about working together, but I had turned him down to focus on my marriage. I laughed at the irony of finally joining the association just to escape that same marriage. It turned out to be the best decision I ever made. I was back, but not in the way she expected. Eleanor tried to make more calls, but no one was answering her anymore. She finally realized that her wealth wouldn't save her this time, and that she was in serious trouble. Even after everything, she still looked like she wanted to fight me. I stepped closer and whispered a few words about her illegal business dealings into her ear. She turned pale and stumbled back, pointing at me with a shaking hand like I was a monster. She stammered that I was lying, but I could see the terror in her eyes. I told her that she knew exactly what I was talking about. I asked her if she was ready to sign the papers and pay me the $30 million I was owed. I told her that if she signed, I would keep her secrets to myself. I handed the divorce papers to Miriam, who was just staring at them with a blank expression. She seemed to be in a total state of shock and didn't even hear me. Her eyes were vacant and her mouth was hanging open. She looked like she was about to burst into tears as she looked at me. Before she could say anything, Eleanor grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the courthouse. Eleanor told her to sign the papers immediately because they couldn't afford to wait any longer. Miriam tried to tell her mother that she still loved me, but Eleanor just told her to have some dignity. She forced Miriam inside to end the marriage right then and there. Eleanor didn't want to hear anything about love or feelings. She told Miriam that she was a powerful woman and that she could have any man she wanted. She told her to stop embarrassing herself and to just get it over with. She dragged Miriam into the building without another word. Miriam was sobbing and trying to pull away, saying she still loved me and didn't want the divorce. It was a pathetic sight, and I felt nothing but relief as they walked away. When I finally held the divorce decree in my hand, I felt like a massive weight had been lifted off my chest. The $30 million hit my account shortly after, and the 2-month-long nightmare was finally over. I was finally a free man. As I left the courthouse, I saw Eleanor shoving Miriam into the back of her Maybach. Miriam kept looking back at me through the window, but I didn't care. I walked to my BMW and didn't look back as I drove away. The divorce was only the beginning of my plan. The real storm was still building, and I was ready for it. 10 days later, I found Miriam waiting for me outside my apartment complex, looking absolutely desperate. She and her mother had a massive falling out after I posted the surveillance footage of Eleanor threatening me at the courthouse. I had included the clips as bonus footage in my apology series, and the public was outraged. It was the final nail in the coffin for their reputations. With the support of Marcus Thompson and Black Bull, the public outcry was more than the company could handle. Sutherland Group's stock price plummeted, and the board of directors finally had enough. They fired both Miriam and Eleanor, stripping them of their power and their legacy. Joey Vance was fired immediately and found himself blacklisted from the entire industry. None of this would have happened if Eleanor hadn't been so arrogant and made so many mistakes. Her attempts to crush me had completely backfired on her entire family. After Miriam's father died, Eleanor had given up some of her shares to stay in power, which proved to be a fatal mistake. She thought she was safe, but she had actually made herself vulnerable to a board takeover. When the scandal broke, the shareholders had all the leverage they needed to get rid of her. Eleanor was out of her mind with rage after being kicked out of her own company. In a moment of pure desperation, she filed lawsuits against me, the association, and Black Bull. She thought she could still win through the legal system, but she was wrong. She even tried to sue her own shareholders, which was like declaring war on everyone at once. She was fighting a losing battle, and she didn't have the resources to keep up. It wasn't long before her legal team started to fall apart. Things only got worse for her from there. Atlas found some truly horrifying information about Eleanor's private art school and the way she ran it. I didn't hesitate to have the information turned over to the authorities for a full investigation. I had suspected something was wrong for a long time. I remembered seeing two young men being escorted out of her estate, looking completely traumatized. I had gone back there after she refused to see me, and that was when I saw them being hurried into a van. They were crying and could barely walk as they were pushed into the vehicle. I took some photos and sent them to Atlas, who spent weeks digging into her past. Now the police had enough evidence to take her into custody for questioning. Miriam was left with nothing now that her mother was under arrest. Their bank accounts were frozen as part of the massive investigation into their finances. Sutherland Group was also being audited, which meant their entire world was coming down around them. Miriam tried to go to her friends for help once she ran out of money, but they just laughed at her. My apology videos had exposed their roles in our marriage, and now the internet was coming for them too. They were too busy trying to save themselves to care about what happened to Miriam. They wanted nothing to do with her and were doing everything they could to distance themselves from the scandal. Miriam found herself completely alone after her friends kicked her out and told her to never come back. She was finally getting a taste of her own medicine. Joey Vance didn't waste any time leaving her once she was broke and powerless. He was already out looking for his next wealthy target to exploit. Atlas told me that the plan was working perfectly, and I finally felt like I could breathe again. I had planned to take down Miriam and her mother from the start, along with her toxic friends and Joey. I just never expected that after everything, she would actually show up at my home again. She had a lot of nerve coming back after what she had done to me. Chloe told me that the building security had finally removed Miriam from the premises and that we were clear to leave. I finished packing my bags and asked her if she wanted to drive herself or ride with me. I was ready to put this whole city behind me for a while. She smiled and told me she was definitely riding with me because she didn't want to drive that far alone. I laughed and realized how tired I actually was from all the stress of the last few months. It was going to be a long trip, but I was glad to have her with me. We were headed to a private training facility in Nevada that the association and Black Bull had recently renovated. We went down to the garage and got into my car, ready to start the next chapter of my life. I was looking forward to focusing on my training and nothing else. As I pulled out of the driveway, someone suddenly jumped out in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes and barely managed to stop in time to avoid hitting them. The seatbelt jerked against my chest, and for a second, I couldn't even breathe. I looked through the windshield and saw Miriam sitting on the ground in front of my bumper. I jumped out of the car and screamed at her, asking if she had completely lost her mind. She could have been killed if I hadn't been paying attention. I asked her if she was trying to get herself killed just to sue me for another settlement. She was crying and looked absolutely terrified as she sat there on the pavement. She finally managed to whisper that she just wanted to see me one last time before I left. I told her to get out of my way and never to call me her husband again. We were done, and I told her she was acting like a stalker by following me around like this. I wanted her out of my life for good, and I wasn't going to be nice about it. She whispered that she was actually there to ask for money, and for a second, I thought I had misheard her. I asked her to repeat herself, and she sniffed and said she needed a loan. I couldn't believe the nerve she had after everything she had put me through. She explained that all of her accounts were frozen and that she was completely broke. She didn't even have enough money to buy gas or food. I asked her why she didn't just sell some of her expensive jewelry or her luxury watch collection. She told me that her house had been burglarized the night before and everything of value was gone. She started sobbing hysterically right there in the street. I remembered Atlas's smug voice on the phone the night before and realized he had taken things a bit further than I expected. He had told me he had a surprise for me, and I finally realized what it was. He had hired someone to rob Miriam's estate and and leave her with absolutely nothing. I cursed him under my breath, but I couldn't really bring myself to feel bad for her. I felt absolutely no guilt as I looked down at her crying on the pavement. I told her that our marriage was over and that I didn't owe her anything. She tried to argue, but I just cut her off before she could say another word. I told her to go to the police if she had been robbed and to stop bothering me. I picked her up and moved her to the side of the road like she was a discarded doll. As I turned to get back in my car, she lunged forward and grabbed onto my leg. She screamed for me not to leave her because she had nothing left in the world. I told her she had a lot of nerve asking me for help after everything she had done to me. I shook her off and headed for the driver's side door, ready to leave her in the dust. I saw her huddled on the ground in the rearview mirror, her whole body shaking with sobs. She looked like a broken child, and the powerful CEO I used to know was completely gone. I felt a momentary pang of something like pity, but I quickly pushed it down. She looked like someone whose entire world had just ended. I started to wonder if the constant stress and the loss of everything had finally caused her to have a mental breakdown. She wasn't acting like the Miriam I knew anymore. I signaled for Chloe to come out of the car and take a look at her. Chloe was a licensed therapist, and I thought she might be able to tell if Miriam was actually in danger. I wanted my revenge, but I didn't want her blood on my hands. I quickly explained the situation to Chloe, and she looked at Miriam with a concerned expression. Miriam had a vacant look in her eyes that made it clear she wasn't fully aware of her surroundings. It was a disturbing sight to see someone fall so far. Chloe spent a few minutes talking to her and checking her vitals. She stood up and confirmed that Miriam was indeed having some kind of mental break. She told me that the stress had likely pushed her over the edge and she needed professional help. She explained that Miriam was suffering from an acute stress reaction and just needed to be kept calm and given time to recover. It wasn't permanent, but she was in no state to be left alone on the street. I felt a sense of relief that she wasn't completely gone. I decided to take a detour and drop her off at a nearby hospital to make sure she was okay. I planned to have Atlas keep an eye on her from a distance just to make sure she didn't do anything drastic. Chloe and I helped her into the back seat and headed for the emergency room. I called Atlas on the way to the hospital and told him what was going on. This whole situation had become far more complicated than I ever intended it to be. I just wanted my divorce, not a front row seat to her mental collapse. The doctors confirmed Chloe's assessment and found a small bruise on the back of Miriam's head. They said she needed bed rest and a stress-free environment for a few weeks. I left her in their care, knowing she was finally in the right place. I checked my watch and told Atlas to handle things at the hospital while I headed to the training base. He apologized and said he only wanted to help me get some revenge, not destroy her life completely. I told him not to worry about it and that we would deal with the fallout later. I told him it wasn't his fault and that she was already on the edge before he even got involved. I asked him about Joey and the other 3 women to see if they were still being dealt with. He leaned in and gave me the update on the rest of the plan. It was late by the time we reached the training facility in the mountains. I had a quick meeting with Marcus Thompson and the Black Bull team before heading to my room. I was exhausted and ready to put the whole day behind me. I took a hot shower and then opened my laptop to check my messages. I had an encrypted email from Atlas with the final details of what happened to the others. I took a deep breath before clicking on the message. It seemed like everyone had fallen for the traps we set for them. All that was left was to let the consequences of their actions catch up to them. I closed my computer and felt a sense of finality as I drifted off to sleep. A soft knock at the door woke me up a few minutes later. I put on my robe and opened the door to find Chloe standing there with a bowl of soup. She asked if I wanted something to eat before I went to sleep. I thanked her and invited her inside, realizing it would be rude to turn her away after everything she had done for me. She sat down while I started eating, and for the first time in weeks, the room felt peaceful. It was nice to have someone I could actually trust around me. We sat in silence for a while, and the only sound was the spoon clinking against the bowl. I noticed her watching me with a strange look in her eyes as I ate. I asked her if something was wrong, but she just smiled and told me to finish my soup. Her intense gaze made me a bit self-conscious, so I tried to finish up quickly. I had noticed that she had been acting differently toward me since the divorce started. She was always there for me, and I started to realize that her feelings might be deeper than just professional respect. She had started acting like my therapist and was always checking in on my mental health. I thought she was just being a good friend, but after the divorce papers were signed, her behavior changed even more. She was constantly doing little things to make my life easier and more comfortable. She started coming over to my apartment to cook dinner and always made sure I had everything I needed. It finally clicked that she was interested in me as more than just a boss. I wasn't sure if I was ready for a new relationship, but I couldn't deny that I liked having her around. I told her straight out that I wasn't ready for anything serious after what I had just been through. She told me she understood, but said that she was willing to wait for as long as it took. Her honesty and patience were exactly what I needed at that moment. She explained that she had grown up in a family of high-achieving doctors and had always felt pressure to follow in their footsteps. She had spent years studying medicine just to make them happy, but she had been miserable the entire time. She finally decided to walk away and find her own path. She switched to psychology, but found herself struggling with her own mental health until she found my old videos. She had seen me talking about facing my fears during a Black Bull interview, and my words had really resonated with her. She said I was the reason she finally found the courage to change her life. My words about facing death and conquering fear had inspired her to take control of her own destiny. She told me that seeing someone take such massive risks made her realize she could survive her own small fears. It was a deeply personal connection that I hadn't expected. She had worked incredibly hard to get her new degrees and then decided to come and work for me as soon as there was an opening. She wanted to be around the person who had given her so much hope. I felt honored that I had made such a difference in her life. I knew I had to move slowly, but I didn't want to lose her either. I saw her getting ready to leave the room and realized I didn't want her to go. I called out to her and told her that if I survived the climb, I want to try being together. I asked her if she would be willing to give us a chance if I made it back from Angel Falls alive. She asked if I was worried that she might turn out to be just like Miriam. I told her that I wasn't afraid of anything anymore and that I trusted her. She walked over and gave me a soft, lingering kiss on the lips. It was a gentle promise of what the future could hold for us if I survived. I felt a sense of hope that I hadn't felt in a very long time. 2 weeks later, Atlas confirmed that our plan had been fully realized. I took a break from my training to review the results of everything we had set in motion. It was a satisfying feeling to see justice finally being served to those who deserved it. It had been an exhausting month of training and coordinating with Atlas. We had carefully dismantled the lives of Joey and Miriam's friends, piece by piece. They were finally facing the consequences of their arrogance and their cruelty. Since Joey Vance loved exploiting wealthy women so much, we decided to give him exactly what he wanted. We set a trap for him that would ensure he spent the rest of his life serving the whims of the most demanding women in the world. He was currently in Japan, thinking he had found a new target, but he was actually walking into a nightmare. Atlas had connected him with a handler in Tokyo who promised him a life of luxury as a high-end host. Joey was so greedy that he fell for the scam immediately, believing he could make millions by entertaining wealthy socialites. He had no idea what he was actually getting into. Joey used all his usual tricks to charm a wealthy married woman, unaware that she was part of the trap. He thought he was finally back on top, but he was actually being set up for a massive fall. His arrogance was his ultimate downfall. He made the mistake of trying to manipulate a very powerful local figure in Tokyo, and the retaliation was swift and brutal. He was severely beaten and then sold to an underground club where he would spend the rest of his days as a slave to the most depraved clients. It was a fitting end for a man who treated people like objects. Joey Vance was now living a nightmare that he could never escape. The final photo in the report showed him locked in a cage, looking absolutely broken and humiliated. I felt no pity for him as I deleted the file and moved on. I checked the folder on Miriam's 3 friends next and found a brief report on their current status. They had fled to a remote island to escape the scandal, but they had run into serious trouble with the local authorities. Their lives of luxury were officially over. They had tried to start over in a place where no one knew them, but Atlas had made sure that they were being watched. They got involved with some very dangerous people and were eventually arrested for their own illegal activities. They were now facing years in a foreign prison with no hope of ever getting out. They had gone to a private club that was known for being a front for a dangerous cult. They thought they were going to a party, but they ended up being trapped in a situation they couldn't control. They were now part of a world that they would never be able to leave. They got into a violent fight with some high-ranking members of the organization and were never seen again. The local police had officially listed them as missing persons, and it was clear that they were gone for good. Their arrogance had finally led them to a place where their money couldn't save them. No one had any idea what happened to them, and the investigation had gone cold. They had walked into their own destruction, and I felt a strange sense of peace knowing they were no longer a threat. I closed the file and focused back on my training. A week later, I was standing at the base of Angel Falls, and the sound of the water was absolutely deafening. The sheer cliff face was covered in a thick mist that made the rock incredibly slick and dangerous. This was the moment I had been preparing for my entire life. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the waterfall wash over me until everything else faded away. I stopped thinking about the live stream, the divorce, and the revenge. It was just me and the mountain now, and nothing else mattered. I reached the starting point and began my ascent, feeling the cold, wet rock under my fingers. Every move required perfect precision and absolute focus focus as I climbed higher and higher. Time seemed to slow down as I focused entirely on the task at hand. I looked down once and saw that the ground had already disappeared into the mist below me. My muscles were screaming in pain, but I knew I couldn't stop now. There was no going back. The only way to survive was to keep moving upward. The middle section of the climb was a brutal battle against gravity and my own fatigue. The overhangs were terrifying, and I had to leap for handholds that I could barely see through the mist. It was a terrifying test of my will to live. Every move I made felt like a gamble with my life. My arms were burning with pain, and my legs were shaking so hard I thought I might lose my footing. I pushed through the agony, refusing to let the mountain break me. I was nearly at the top, but my vision was starting to blur and my breathing was ragged. Images of my life with Miriam and the court case kept flashing through my mind. I used the anger and the pain to fuel my final push toward the summit. My fingers finally found the edge of the summit, and I pulled myself up with the last of my strength. I let out a scream of triumph as I rolled onto the flat ground at the top of the falls. I had done it. I had conquered the impossible. I lay there for a long time, feeling a sense of peace and clarity that I had never experienced before. I felt like I'd been reborn on that mountaintop. I was alive, and for the first time in years, I was truly free. The sun broke through the clouds just as I stood up to look out over the horizon. The view was absolutely breathtaking, and I felt tears streaming down my face. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because I had finally found my way back to myself. 5.5 years after my last challenge, I had completed the third Ozaki trial. I was back in the world where I belonged. I heard the sound of the rescue helicopter approaching and saw the harness being lowered down to me. I clipped myself in and gave the pilot a thumbs up. I was ready to go home and start my new life. This was the beginning of my new life, and I was excited to see what the future held. We had a massive celebration at the camp that night, and everyone was cheering for my success. It was a night I would never forget. Marcus Thompson was so happy, he kept buying rounds of drinks for everyone and told me we were like brothers now. He had taken a huge risk by backing me, and he was clearly relieved that everything had worked out. We celebrated together until the early hours of the morning. The representatives from Black Bull told me that they were doubling my bonus to $10 million because the stream had been so successful. They told me they wanted to keep working with me even if I decided to retire from extreme sports. I was set for life, and I couldn't believe my luck. Chloe stayed by my side throughout the celebration, giving me supportive smiles whenever I looked her way. After everyone else had gone to bed, we sat out on a rock and watched the stars together. It was a perfect ending to an incredible day. When we got back to the States, the news of my climb and the final court rulings were the only things anyone was talking about. I was being hailed as a national hero for completing the climb, while Miriam and her mother were being condemned for their crimes. The public's perception of us had completely flipped. Miriam and Eleanor Sutherland were now the most hated women in the country. After a 2-month investigation, Eleanor was finally sentenced for a long list of crimes, including human trafficking and massive tax fraud. Her empire had completely crumbled. Eleanor had used her art school as a front for her crimes against her students and had silenced anyone who tried to speak out. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Miriam was found to have helped cover up her mother's crimes and was sentenced to 10 years as an accomplice. I was shocked when I heard about Miriam's 10-year sentence because I had no idea she was involved in her mother's crimes. I felt a strange sense of closure as I realized she was finally paying for her choices. I couldn't help but smile as I realized my life was finally my own again. I put my tablet down and walked out onto the balcony to watch the sunset over Los Angeles. I felt a warm hand slip into mine and looked over to see Chloe standing there with a peaceful expression. She had stayed with me through everything, and I knew I wanted her in my future. She asked if I was okay, and I told her I was better than I had been in years. I squeezed her hand and told her that everything finally felt right again. I pulled her into a hug and realized that the pain of the past was finally starting to fade away. I thanked her for being my light during my darkest moments. She told me that I was the one who did all the hard work and that she was just there to support me. She said she was happy to have been by my side during the journey. The screen of my tablet went dark, and it felt like my old life was finally over for good. I watched the city lights start to flicker on as the sun went down. It was a beautiful sight, and I felt a sense of excitement for the future. I told her I was starving and asked if we could go out to dinner instead of eating my strict training diet. She laughed and said she would love to try the new place down the street. Her eyes crinkled when she smiled, and I felt my heart swell with happiness. She told me I could eat whatever I wanted as long as it wasn't too spicy since I was still recovering. I promised to behave, and we headed for the door hand in hand. We were ready to start our new life together, and I couldn't wait to see what happened next. We decided to walk to the restaurant so we could enjoy the evening air and the energy of the city. I knew that there would still be challenges ahead, but I wasn't worried. The path was clear now, and for the first time, I wasn't walking it alone. This story's conclusion is far more than just a satisfying tale of revenge and a dramatic comeback. It serves as a profound reflection on the difficult process of rebuilding oneself from the ground up. The truth is that everyone eventually faces their own version of Angel Falls, a challenge that simply cannot be avoided. There are times when we are clearly in the right, yet life still blindsides us with a cruel reality. We offer our genuine hearts only to be treated like disposable stepping stones, facing humiliation and even being forced to apologize to the very people who destroyed us. In those dark moments, the greatest challenge isn't surviving the malice of others, but ensuring that bitterness doesn't rot your soul from the inside out. If you currently feel lost in the shadows, remember that the very weight trying to pull you down can often become the leverage you need to climb higher. True strength is not found in never falling, but in using the momentum of your lowest point to scale the most treacherous peaks of your life. Edward ultimately won not because of the $10 million prize or the downfall of Miriam and her mother. His true victory came when he realized that the betrayal and humiliation that once broke his spirit were utterly insignificant when compared to the vastness of the world and his own resurrected will. My hope is that once you conquer your own mountain, you can stand in the sunset like Edward and reach out for someone who truly understands your worth. You must believe that the fragments of your broken past will eventually fuse together into an unbreakable armor for your future. You possess far more power than you realize, and as long as you refuse to give up, life can never truly defeat you.